Right. Where did she go? I think we're all ready to start, aren't we? Hello everyone, and welcome to this Book Fringe event at the wonderful Lighthouse Books. We've got a lot to talk about today. We're here to talk about nature writing and how the Nan Shepherd Prize basically broke the boundaries for a new wave of nature writing. And I'm delighted that we've got Caro Clarke here to talk about it, and Rhiannon Bull. Please give a round of applause. So Caro Clarke was one of the person who co-founded the Nan Shepherd Prize. So I'm absolutely delighted you're here to talk about it today. It was when we went to Canongate in 2019. And you run your own literacy agency, which we'll get back to that later. And Rhiannon Bull is a writer and illustrator who is on the cusp of great things. Her book is not quite finished yet, but it's about anxiety, foraging, and the queer experience in the natural world. So we really do have a lot to kind of get into, and I think we should start with Caro, because I don't think without you we would be here today, and without you we wouldn't really be having this conversation at all. So we really do appreciate you being here and what you started. So can you tell us what made you think, okay, something has to change here? What kick-started the Nan Shepherd Prize?
So I guess it was around 2017, and the Wainwright Prize long list came out, and it was yet again very similar demographic on that list. And there have been conversations about diversity, so many conversations about diversity in publishing, and you could tell that yet again, whatever initiatives that had been happening didn't quite reach nature writing in this way. And so the Wainwright Prize is to celebrate the best nature writing books about the UK, so very much about homegrown authors. And there were quite a few people who also had the same reaction to it, who did a variety of other initiatives. So you had the brilliant Jessica J. Lee, who created the Willow Herb Review to showcase writers of colour, nature writers of colour. You also had the Forestry Commission, who had a brilliant writer in residence, Akia Mackenzie, to write about this. And my colleague Megan Reid and I, who both worked at Canongate, we wondered what we could do to change things. And so we thought that, well, because we're a publisher, we know how nature writing books get published. And so we decided to create a prize for new writers, and to make sure that the criteria was for underrepresented writers only, so based on self-identification, and that the submission to the prize would be a non-fiction proposal, which is what you would submit to an agent or a publisher, so that every single bit of work that would be done for the prize could be used to submit to agents or to send to publishers. And we also created resources online on our website, which are still there, on how to create, what is a proposal, how do you create one. We even have a template on it, which you can download, which is a Word document that is formatted the way you could format a proposal. And we also decided to make a list of all the agents within the UK who represent nature writing. And so we had interviews with them so that they could talk about what they love in nature writing books, what really stands out in a nature writing book for them in a submission. So we did all of this for the website. And we also did a second thing on the side, which was to showcase existing underrepresented writers within the genre who were not getting the noise that other books would get. So back in 2019 or 18, if you went to certain retailers into nature writing and you scroll through, you would be hard-pressed to find a woman, you would be hard-pressed to find any writer of colour within nature writing. And so what we wanted to do was also to boost the people who were already there and who were already doing that work of expanding nature writing. And so we created the Book of the Week, which was to showcase an underrepresented nature writer every week and their books, and so that as well new writers could be like, oh wow, I didn't even know this book a book like this was published. And so we did that work at the same time. The prize happened for the first time in 2019. And our winner was Nina Mingya Powles, Small Bodies of Water, the book which you can find on the table over here. And we made it a biennial prize because we receive 150 submissions and we do it more or less all in our free time. So we decided to make it every 2 years. And so the second iteration of the prize, Rhiannon being shortlisted last year in 2021, and the winner was Michelle Farrell for her book Uprooted, which is an absolutely brilliant book which will be published next year at Canongate.
That's brilliant, and I'm going to pick you up on about 7 or 8 points that you made there. But first of all, you mentioned that you were shortlisted in 2021. How did that feel? How did that make you make your writing feel?
Sure. To begin with, just kind of in and of itself, it was just an amazing thing to have happened. It still feels slightly surreal. Like a lot of people, I'm sure, kind of during the pandemic, I had quite a lot of time where everything seemed to have ground to a halt. A lot of projects I've been working on just kind of stopped. But what that did give me was a bit of time to think about what do I actually really want to be doing, what do I really want to be working on, and the proposal that I submitted is what had kind of came out of that. So it's a nice validation to get to actually make the shortlist. And then just in practical terms, I mean, I had agents get in touch. I've signed with an agent now, which is really exciting. It's given me a bit of a push to kind of pursue some other opportunities kind of related to nature writing. So yeah, in kind of personal and practical terms, it's been amazing. Thank you. Yeah.
And what is your book about? Can you tell us more about it?
Sure. So I guess it starts with my own experiences of kind of health anxiety. So I've had a lot of experience with kind of hypochondria, which at its worst for me was quite extreme. I used to get a lot of phantom symptoms, so I would have kind of like a pain in the back of my head and think I was having a stroke, or I would get pins and needles in my arms and be convinced that I must have some kind of motor neuron disease coming on. So at the sort of time that was particularly bad, I had some CBT sessions that kind of helped me get it under control to an extent, but what that basically meant was just shutting down anything to do with my body, anything to do with my health. I used to have a lot of very strict rules about not watching TV shows or kind of following news stories that had any kind of health or illness sort of storyline. Then it was only when I moved to Edinburgh some years later, I made this kind of quite rogue decision to take this course on herbal medicine. Still not completely sure why I signed up for this course, because it did seem to go against all these rules that I'd sort of set up for myself. But kind of, I guess the book is then about my study of kind of medicinal plants, sort of foraging for plants, and the impact that had on my relationship with my body, with my health, kind of more generally with the natural world. And as you kind of mentioned, then it's a little bit more broadly looking at how women particularly, but any group that feels excluded from natural spaces, how that can be kind of problematic if you're thinking of nature as cure. So yeah, that's the rough outline.
And your book, you're foraging in the city basically as well. So
most of the time, yeah.
Which is one of my questions is to both of you. What does nature writing mean to you, and what should it mean? And I think that really, explains that. Nature is anything. It's not just upon a fell or by a lake or anything like that. It's in the city. I mean, look at us here, isn't it? You go first.
Oh, sorry.
So what does nature writing mean to you?
Sure. I mean, I guess for me, the thing that I find interesting in the genre is that relationship between people and the natural world, and kind of picking up on what you were talking about. That's the thing that I found kind of frustrating or limiting with it, is just why you would look at one particular type of person or one particular type of experience. Yeah, it feels quite a narrow range of things you get to read about. So yeah, I suppose automatically the picture I get when I think about nature writing is someone who's probably a man, probably straight, probably white, sort of striding out for their transcendental experience in nature. And it's not even that I don't enjoy reading those books, because I really do. It's just like I want more. I want to hear other people's stories, and
we all live in it. We all live in this world, so we should be hearing all of the stories. Mm-hmm. And what about you, Caro?
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel in the same way that every person in the world has a specific relationship with other people, we all have a unique perspective on nature. You don't need a doctorate from Oxford and know the Latin names of herbs and plants to be able to write about nature. And this is, partially why I love Nina's book so much, Small Bodies of Water, because it's a lot about your everyday encounter with nature. It's a lot about fruits. It's a lot about flowers. And why is that lesser than hiking up a mountain in a feeling of dominating nature? And so it's very much, for me, nature writing is a perspective on nature that I either relate to or, that I've experienced myself, or one that I've never considered before and that I would love to. And so for many years, nature writing I didn't feel was for someone like me. Like, I didn't read nature writing for many years because I didn't really relate to it, and I didn't think my experience of nature was what nature writing was. Mm-hmm. But every person's perspective needs to be shared.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people feel like that. I think even people who live in nature, because I come from a rural background, and a lot of my family all readers, but they would never naturally read some of the nature writing out there because it feels a little bit like they're being talked down to. So, we don't want to be told everything. It's like, we want our opportunity to show what we feel and, experience every day. I'm jumping over my questions here, so sorry, because I know I've given you like an order a little bit, but who do you think at the moment is pushing boundaries then in nature writing?
Do you want to go? No. There's just so much exciting writing, so it's probably going to be a very incomplete list.
It can never be complete, though. There's so many. And when you look at the Lighthouse Bookshop,
exactly.
It just keeps going and going and going. So it's great.
Yeah. So one of the most exciting one that either was released last week or the week before is Amanda Thompson's Belonging, and it does something beautiful to the sense of place, the sense of identity, that is our sense of belonging with nature. You have Polly Atkin, disclosure on my client, who writes beautifully about disability and nature, and a criticism about the nature cure, which I know you're writing about as well. You have Claire Ratinon, whose book Unearth was published just earlier this year, which is talking about urban gardening in some way and a closer relationship with working with nature. I mentioned Zakia Mackenzie, who was the writer in residence with the Forestry Commission, who had a book out with Rough Trade about the history of Jamaica. And nature as well, and a lot of the nature that was taken from Jamaica and brought to the UK, which is just beautiful. And you have Kerry Doherty's book on thin places and trauma, and there's genuinely so much. I could go on.
What do you read and listen to that kind of inspires you when you're writing as well?
So I guess the books that had kind of an impact on me in terms of sort of style when I was sort of reading stuff in preparation for the submission. I'm quite behind the time, so it was really recent, but I finally read Amy Liptrop's The Outrun, which was brilliant. I also really loved Catherine May's Wintering. And the other writer who I really love is Rebecca Solnit, who I guess is not specifically nature writing, but that way that she just seems to dance between all these different topics that seem quite disparate and then somehow just magically brings them all together. I aspire to be able to do something like that. And I guess the other books that I was sort of really looking for around the prize were anything by sort of queer writers. I don't know that I've been really actively looking for those stories up until the submission, and I was just really horrified by how few I could actually find, so particularly anything by sort of queer women or by anybody who's bisexual. It just seemed to be almost non-existent. Yeah, so I read Alice Fowler's Hidden Nature, which is really lovely.
Luke Turner as well.
Yeah, Out of the Woods, so that's the other one. But I mean, those are the two that I could find, basically. Yeah. So I mean, if anyone has any recommendations, I'm really open to hearing more.
I mean, it would be good if we all gave each other recommendations, for sure. So gardening, let me just go back to gardening for a minute, because Nina's book actually goes into gardening quite a lot as well. And I love that. There are a lot of books about gardening at the moment, but that is a real easy way for people to suddenly realise that actually nature is for everyone, isn't it? And what do you think it is about gardening books that really kind of connect with people?
I think there's this slightly older idea that you need a very massive garden to garden. And I think that a lot of the newer books have, certainly, having a windowsill. It's a lot about guerrilla gardening as well. So J.C. Miala's book, A Loveliness of Ladybirds, which was shortlisted for the Nan Prize in 2019, will be out with Little Taller next year. And she talks a lot about gardening in Kenya and in the UK, which are two of the nations that do a lot of allotments and gardening for personal use. And she has an entire chapter on guerrilla gardening. And I think, it's changing this idea that gardening is agriculture, and also changing the idea that you need to own a lot to garden.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the fact that gardening can really give you a whole history of plants and nations. It's an economic, and it's just really interesting that gardening gives you all of that in one go, just about one plant, like the rhododendron, for instance. So I think that's fascinating. Did you find that? So your book's about foraging. Were you surprised how effective looking at plants and discovering about plants actually did to you, how it affected your writing?
Yeah, definitely. I guess, the whole project is about that kind of relationship with plants and my experiences foraging. For me, more than the writing, it really transformed the way that I kind of walked, because I think I'm so used to just walking down the street, or even sort of, I live on the outskirts of Edinburgh, so sort of through a park or anything, and just it being this kind of wash of green, and kind of knowing what the different plants were and kind of what they did, and being able to sort of name them just gave me like a much richer experience of walking. I think a bit like you were talking about with the urban gardening, the other thing with the looking at foraging kind of within the city, it's amazing how much you can actually do, even if you can't just go out to a forest or into a really sort of wild space, whatever that means, to sort of look for plants.
And what stage are you at with the book? You're at proposal stage, is that right?
Yes, so it's out on submission at the moment. So if everyone could keep their fingers crossed for me, that would be great.
So that means it's not written yet, though, doesn't it? So you've written 3 or 4 chapters.
Yeah, so it's the opening chapters, kind of the outlines for the remaining chapters in the book, and a synopsis that are out with my agent at the moment.
So what was so good about the Nan Shepherd Prize, I thought, was at the start, from the very beginning, when you set up the prize, there were resources there. Advice on structure, like you said, interviews with agents. For me, that really did help to break down the barriers, because publishing does feel like a bit of a closed world. How on earth do you get anything published, and especially if you're one of the underrepresented writers. So is that what you wanted to do, to really break down those barriers?
Yes, definitely. And I think a lot of people know that when you want to sell a fiction book, you need to finish the book. But not many people know that non-fiction actually sells on proposal. You don't need to have finished the book. You don't need to have finished the research. And therefore, I think a lot of people feel that the book they want to write about nature would take years, and they can't really afford to do it. And it's like, you don't need to. You can just do a proposal. And so it was this idea that actually breaking it down into different sections, because proposal can be a very scary word if you don't deal with it on a daily basis. And so a proposal is very much a synopsis, which is a summary of the book, start to finish, spoilers included. And it doesn't have to be pretty writing. It can just be a description of what the book will be. The pretty writing is in your sample chapters, and this is where you can get a sense of your style, and it has descriptions of each chapter, so what you want to do, the structure, the themes you're going to explore, and then some sample chapters that showcase your writing style, and that's it.
I have to say, you're making it sound very easy, but I know from experience it's not easy. It is so hard to write a proposal.
And the synopsis is the hardest thing to write, and it sounds awful, and you'll want to give up, and everyone's been there, don't worry.
It's because you're basically writing the whole book without having written it or done the research. And so, if you've got 12 chapters, say, you need to say what's in each chapter. And you've not done that research yet. So, writing non-fiction is a whole different ballgame to writing fiction. And well, I suppose it's the same with travel and everything else. It's you don't know what's going to come, but you just got to just plan it well and hope for the best, I suppose.
Exactly. And also, if you worry that 5 years later, when you finish the book and it's slightly different to your proposal, that is entirely normal, happens to everyone. Usually it evolves in a very natural, organic way for the better for the book. So it's completely normal, and it happens to most books.
And usually you think, when you get to the end of the book, you realise, oh, this is what the book's about.
Exactly. It's usually you're planning on what the book is, completely different book at the end.
Well, when you worked at Canongate, were you surprised at the amount of people that entered and the variety of it, really?
Yes. I think, mostly we're very stressed because 50% of entries come on the last 5 hours to the deadline. And so you're like, for the first 2 months, you just received 20. And you're like, oh, that's really not a lot. And so but no, you receive them on the last day. It's normal. The second year, we're a lot less stressed about it. But a lot of the work that we did was reaching out to people and actually saying, yes, you can write the book. You have my permission. Because a lot of people feel, well, I don't really see myself in the show. So really, can I write nature writing? And yes. And so a lot of the time was spent, saying, yes, we really do want to read your book. Please send it. And there was a huge, essentially, there are many, many, many writers out there, especially from underrepresented backgrounds, who want to write nature writing. So we need to bridge that sort of blockage somewhere to make sure that, many, many of them get published and find an agent, find a publisher.
So you've since left Canongate and set up your own literary agency.
That was the next step into actually personally selling these books.
So that's your aim, you want to bridge that gap.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have quite a few of those shortlisted and long-listed authors from Nan.
That must feel lovely.
Yes. I know. I love it, and it's so nice, and to have, to just work on the proposals and hone it, because obviously you never stop editing your proposal or your writing. And it's just, there's so much amazing writing out there.
Mm-hmm. So who have you got at the moment that you think we should be looking out for soon?
So many.
It's hard to, picking your favorite children.
So JC Nyala's book will be out next year with Little Taller. I also going to go out soon, so it'll be on submission just like you. Wendy Pratt's gorgeous book, The Ghost Lake, which is about Scarborough and the Paleolithic lake. And it's just really beautiful. And I also have Christina Riley, who does the Nature Library, which is an itinerant library that goes around Scotland with brilliant books on nature.
She did that gorgeous thing during lockdown with the pictures with the
beach today. Beautiful. So she has a wonderful book about nature, the importance of storytelling in nature, and then also Fiona Black, who was longlisted in 2019, who is following in the footstep of one of the first women travellers in Scotland.
Oh, wow.
And so following that, and also Polly Atkins' memoir on disability and the body.
Mm-hmm. So, sorry, I'll come back to you in a minute, Rhiannon, but there's quite a few, you've covered a lot of different kind of people and backgrounds there. What do you think is still missing from a market as a reader and as an agent?
So much. So I think there's... I think the illusion when it comes to diversity is that people think, if you can name one nature writer of colour or one disabled writer, then the progress is done. But ultimately, you should be able to name up to 10 or 15, and we're just not there yet for any category. And that is without even talking about intersectionality and people at the intersection of identities. And so there is so much more work to be done. I think, especially in terms of disability, there are just so few books in nature.
And do you think the big publishers, are they, you mentioned Little Toller, I mean, they're a brilliant publisher of nature writing. Do you think they're all still as keen to kind of showcase this, or do you think some are kind of getting, a little bit snowed under with it at all? Does that make sense?
It's really hard. I feel for a lot of publishers, if you have a list of existing writers, you will always try to buy their next book. And so actually the number of new writers you take on is not as big as the number of books you will publish. But if you look at the current books that are being published from underrepresented voices in nature, you will notice that a lot of them come from independent publishers. Yeah. So, I feel they're doing a lot of that work.
So Rhiannon, what? Let me just look at my notes here for a second. Thank you. Oh, sorry about that. I was so interested in that question. I completely threw myself. Sorry. That's what I was going to ask you about, illustrating, because I looked at your website and I think your illustration's absolutely fascinating. It's so beautiful. And I think a book with about foraging in the city, about anxiety, would really fit nicely. And I'm not obviously saying your publisher should do this, but would you like to have illustration involved in your book? Because I think it would sit really nicely.
So I've been thinking a bit about this because people ask me all the time how the writing and the illustration come together. And it's a question I find quite difficult because mainly I actually think of them as two things I do that are both always just in competition for my time. Because if I'm doing the artwork, I'm not spending enough time on the writing. And if I'm writing, I'm not spending enough time on the artwork. So it's really nice to think that there could be a project where those two things did come together, if nothing else, because it would stop me just stressing that I'm spending my time on the wrong thing all of the time. But I suppose I didn't approach the project with the illustration in mind. So other than that, I think quite visually, and I have to keep reminding myself when I'm writing, you have to not just write about what you can see, because that's what I default to. I suppose I haven't approached it with that in mind, but I'd love the opportunity to bring those two things together. So if it came up, I'd be very interested.
I grew up in Beatrix Potter land, and Beatrix Potter was very much an illustrator as well as obviously writing, and I think it works really well in some cases, and I think with it, foraging especially, it would work beautifully.
Okay, I'm going to note this down and pitch it later.
Yeah, think about it, really think about it. So with the Nan Shepherd Prize, can I ask, obviously, it's pretty obvious why you chose Nan Shepherd, but, she wasn't very well known about 10 years ago, and then all of a sudden she's had a bit of a reprisal. Is that why you chose her? Was there anyone else you could have chosen?
No, we actually chose her because The Living Mountain was actually written 40 years before it was published. And Nan Shepherd shared the manuscript with someone, and that person said no one's ever going to want to read it. And based on that one opinion, she put it away in a drawer for 40 years. And we wanted to be the people to shout louder that anyone that would tell you to put it away for 40 years, so that you would feel the strength that actually so many other people want to read your writing, and we want to share that. So we wanted to call it that, so that no one puts away a manuscript.
So if you think she was here today and, or she was reading books and things like that, what kind of books would she choose, do you think, out of what's available at the moment?
It's such a hard question.
I know it is.
This is obviously the obvious one is Anna Fleming, Time on Rock, who was so inspired by Nan Shepherd. But I think it's also, she loved writing about her local area. And so I think the amount of books, Amanda Thompson, you have Maliki Talek's wonderful book, Illuminated by Water, that I can see there. A lot of the books that feature a very local description by a local person, important distinction here, I think she would love these books. And especially, some books from all over the world. I don't know if you've read Jessica J. Lee's Two Trees, Make a Forest. which is a gorgeous book in Taiwan about language and memory and history. And it's the type of book that is just transcends genres and just makes you dream and think in so many ways. And so I think this kind of exciting book.
See, I think that's what I like about nature writing, is that it's not ever really nature writing, it's everything. You know, I think the banner nature writing is quite problematic in a lot of ways, because, you know, it's not just about nature, it's about 100 other things. You know, crime is usually about crime, you know, books and things like that. You can fit them into different categories, but nature writing is completely different. And is that how you feel about it?
Yeah, I think so. So actually the author that I was thinking of for Nan Shepherd is maybe someone like Kathleen Jamie, who has I can't remember if it's Findings or Sightlines, but where she's writing about being in the Cairngorms, and there's a bit where she's talking about trying to wash her kids' socks before she can go out, and that feels very real to me, and less like making nature this thing that's very separate from us, that you can only experience when you go out and it's in this isolated space and not really part of your everyday life. And I think, yeah, I feel like that's what's lovely in Nan Shepherd, but also in someone like Kathleen Jamie's work as well.
Yeah.
And obviously the poetry as well.
Oh yes, of course, yes, poetry. Yeah, we've not even touched on poetry, because because you know, poetry. What can you talk about that? I mean, there's so many different nature writers who, you know, touch on poetry. But always has been. You know, who's really writing about poetry at the moment? Who you'd recommend?
Oh, I mean,
Polly Aitken. Yeah, I would as well, though.
Yes. And also Elizabeth Jane Burnett, who's she writes poetry, so she has a lovely poetry collection called Swim, or Swims, with or without the S, can't remember. And she also wrote a narrative nonfiction nature writing book as well. And I think, I mean, it's actually a lot of my nature writing authors are also poets, and I think a lot of poetry that's gets written about the natural world in general. And so I think poets have an affinity for writing about nature. But that might be a wild generalization, I don't know.
Do you write poetry as well?
No, I'm rubbish at it. I don't have any poets to recommend, probably because in a very egocentric way, I can't do it. So not very well read in that area.
That's fair enough. Nina's book obviously spans so many different continents, and you're talking about Jessica J. Lee and people like that as well. You know, it's what nature from a different country is absolutely fascinating too, and it would be really nice to read some more books that, you know, touches on all of that, and not just in Britain, because I think sometimes in Britain we kind of go the Highlands a little bit, and I mean, I've fallen into that kind of, you know, I've come from a Lake District, so I write about Cumbria a lot, but there's so many books about Cumbria. But, you know, that's where I'm from, so I'm going to write a little bit about it. But, there's other places in the UK or in the world that you think, you know, we'd like to hear more from.
The one author that I love, who's American, is actually Robin Wall Kimmerer, who writes moss. About exactly, and also braiding sweetgrass, which is, and if you listen to it on audio, she reads it, and it's like practically transcendental to listen to it, and you know, I think it's not just books from specific countries, but I think from certain cultures who have a different way, a different relationship with nature than we do, in whatever way that presents. And so I think it's really, I think this sort of new trend of trying to find books by local authors internationally rather than sending out a British person there, I think is you know, really good. And obviously in this current time of climate change and climate catastrophe, I think is a much more sustainable way of, you know, dealing with this within the genre.
Well, I would like to read a few more books about people who actually work within nature. You know, we have a lot of book about farming, I think, but maybe things like forestry, and also that comes from a personal point of view because my dad was a forester, or is a forester. But you talk about local, and that's really interesting as well, because you do feel like a lot of people write books about going to places, and, you know, you don't feel you want to hear more about what it is experiencing it, you know, from actual beginning, and also all seasons. You know, it's different driving from A to B in the winter than it is in the summer. Or when you actually experience weather and life like that, I think it's different. Does that make, do you agree with that at all?
I guess I have to have mixed feelings on that because a lot of my book is set in Scotland, and as you may be able to tell, I'm not actually Scottish.
But you live here.
But yes, so
that's yeah.
So it's over. I've been here about 5 years now, so it's over the sort of length of time, and for me, it was very much about how you kind of find yourself in a place by kind of on that kind of small scale with the getting to know plants and things like that.
Yeah.
So kind of part of what was interesting about writing the book for me was definitely about being in a place that was new and how you get to know it and how you get to feel part of that place.
Yeah.
Maybe sometime in future. I'm from Essex originally, and I feel like that's a really underappreciated landscape. That's one where you really have to look hard to find the beauty in it. But if you're into salt marsh, it's really nice. But I think because I know it very well, I really do love it. And I go home and I go down to the creek from near where my parents live, and I see that, get that mud smell, and I think, oh, this is home. So
is that still home then, do you think, to you? It's difficult, isn't it?
I don't know. That's a too difficult question for now.
Because I always say, well, I'm going to Cumbria, I'm going home, but then I feel like this is home. So there is, that's, I think Amanda Thompson's book might be quite interesting because, the whole question of home and where you feel, I suppose, most comfortable. There could be more than one place, I suppose. And what about you? Do you think, that's what when you said about local, I thought that's really interesting, I think.
Yes, and I think you want to hear from people who have always lived in their land, wherever that may be, and how they've interacted with nature. I think I value that kind of knowledge and book a lot more than someone who just went for research for a week and left. That's not. But then there's a lot of brilliant books, where essentially it's a person talking to locals and reporting these conversations, which you wouldn't necessarily read otherwise. So Cal Flynn's book, Islands of Abandonment, is like this, and it's one of the best books I've read in recent years. I think it's absolutely unexpected and amazing. And you also have Why We Swim by Bonnie Tsu,
right?
And which is all about swimming, and it has amazing stories. So if you're into swimming, it's a really brilliant one.
You mentioned earlier as well, Book of the Week that you did for Nan Shepherd. It's really important to keep championing these books and authors that are already out. Why do you feel that so strongly? Because in some ways they're out there, they've already done it, but can they kind of get lost in the wayside a little bit? It's always good to keep pushing.
Definitely. I think I think people who published books like 10 years ago did not get support, especially if they were from an underrepresented background or an underrepresented voice. And so you need to keep these people in mind who were the foreparents and who paved the way. It is incredibly important to keep supporting these voices, and I think it's also publishing loves. This is the first person who did that, and this is new, never been done before, and it's not. I feel it's nice to sell books, but it rarely represents reality, and so I think it's always important to credit the people who've come before you and to keep boosting these voices, because you will not get a truly inclusive and varied genre if you don't do that, if you don't support every voice who has come and who has done that work.
Absolutely, yeah. And you also mentioned climate change, which obviously is so terrifying at the moment. There are people writing about this, which, is really, really good, and there'll be more people. Nina's book does touch on that a little bit, and I suppose, I don't know if you've read Ben Rowlands' book about the tree line.
Not yet.
No, it's on my bedside table, but I've not read it yet. It's just, it terrifies me so much, but I think we need to be reading about it and talking about it so much more. Do you think do you mention that in your book at all?
I think I personally feel like you can't really write a nature writing book now and not talk about climate change. I guess something that. So I guess when I'm thinking about the nature cure, something that I haven't written this bit of the book yet, but I feel like it's putting a lot on the natural world to expect it to kind of cure us in some way.
Yes.
And I think something that's both helpful for us and the natural world is to kind of reconceive of it as being more like a relationship. So not where it's some resource that will help us in some way, but something that can sort of care for us and we care for in return. I just don't see how you could write about nature and not talk about climate change at the moment. So
not talk about what is
really
happening.
Disingenuous, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm quite interested to see if anyone's got any questions in the audience before we kind of finish with a few questions here. Has anyone got any questions?
Just one online while you connect
Oh.
your mic.
Thank you.
Jamie is asking, what parts of the publishing ecosystem have the most work to do? Is it prizes, publishers, writing courses, etc.?
Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah.
If there was one solution, we probably would have done it by now. So there isn't one. But it's about, I think everyone has the power to do something. And you should always be conscious of the environment, the work that you're doing and the sort of the context of which you're doing it in. Obviously I mentioned the Wainwright Prize. The Wainwright Prize has done a lot of work. It can't list books that are not being published. Publishers can't publish books they're not being sent to by agents. Agents can't represent books that they're not being sent to, etc. So it's like everyone needs to do a little bit of work and to be conscious. And I think there's also, especially in nature writing, I think things have changed now, but when we started, nature writing very much felt like you had to have a degree, know the Latin names, you had to be a man, white, you had to be privileged or rich enough to be able to leave your home for 3 or 4 months, to go to be able-bodied enough to hike up a mountain, and that's just not most people. It's actually a very small minority of people who can do that. And so it gave the illusion that nature writing is this. You have to conquer something. You have to dominate nature. And Nan Shepherd, her writing was very much the opposite of that. It was being in communion with nature. It was being in your local place. It was nothing about dominating. It was just being in tune with nature. And so it's just challenging that, why are pretty flowers somehow lesser than other things? You have to challenge what you think nature writing is, because it can be anything.
I'm going to say as well, I think it's also important to look outside of the publishing process, because there are so many issues for certain groups with things like access to green space. And if you don't have people who have that experience in the first place, they're not going to write about it. So I think I wouldn't want to see it as an issue that's just limited to within publishing.
That's very true. And how do you even begin to solve that? I suppose a big place is like the Forestry Commission or maybe the RSPB. If they kind of invite more people in to experience what they can give them, it would be really good. Do you think it's just the issues about underrepresented writers and things like that? Do you think it covers all of publishing? I suppose it just covers everything, doesn't it? It's not just nature writing. It's not just another type of writing. It's everything. It's on in TV and the radio as well. So there's lots more we can do. Yeah. Are there any more questions? Oh, there's one over there. I think we need
Microphone.
Thank you. She's running. Oh, mine. Yeah, it's fine.
There we go. Around the nature. Thank you. Hello. Rhiannon, I just wanted to say that when I read the listing for this event, the first thing I did was went to try and buy your book. And I even rang the shop and was like, I can't find this book. Where can I buy it? And they were like, it's not even published yet. So I guess what I wanted to say was just so much luck and support in the process.
Thank you.
And I guess I also wanted to ask, what can we do, we as readers or consumers of people's art and content, do to support people who aren't yet published? What can we do to support you? I was like, can we send the publishers messages? What would help?
I mean, if you want to, please do.
It was a video campaign.
I mean, I guess actually hearing things like that is, as someone who is writing, like that really means a lot. It's especially when it's writing about a topic that feels like a little bit vulnerable, kind of getting that feedback. I don't even have the words really to say that is very meaningful. I mean, I guess probably you're actually a bit better placed to talk about on the sort of publishing side of things, how readers can make a difference. But
really is supporting by buying books specifically from independent bookshops, buying books, going to events, show publishing that events by a disabled nature writer can sell out and can sell many copies as much as other writers, and it's that supporting the existing writers that will make publishers think, there's a market after all, and this is what we need.
Because for publishers, it is all about making money, isn't it? And they need to know that this will make money, and so all we can do is really just make the money.
Rebecca, you also have a book out next year. How can people support your book?
I guess, again, when it comes out, pre-order, yes. Although I'm not at the stage yet where I have, I suppose I'm one step ahead of you. I'm like a year ahead of you. It's glacial as well. Everything moves very slowly. I've finished my first draft of my book, and I'm waiting for the edits back. And I thought they would be a few months ago, and they're still not here. And so I'm waiting, and it's fine. But I am desperate to get them back to see what they're like and to see how much work I've got to do. But my book will be out next year. Am I allowed to say a bit about it then? So my book, I think at the moment, it's called Estate, The Lives of a Rural Working Class. And it's about, now this is what's so difficult as well, having a strapline, knowing exactly what your book is about. It's about rural industry, housing, and that connection to land, whether you own it or not. Boom, that's it, that line. I grew up in tied housing, where the house comes with a job, and my dad was a forester, and when you lose your house, when you lose your job, you lose your house. And rural industry had this, whether it was coal mining, mills, things like that, historically, they all had it. And so I look back historically all of that, because it turns out all my family grew up like that. And I look back and I look forward to what is happening today with housing and in rural areas and second homes and things like that. So I cover quite a lot, and land buyouts, and there's quite a lot. So I'm waiting on edits back to that, and we'll see how that goes. Thank you for asking.
As a bookseller, it's very exciting. Does anyone else have a question? Yeah.
I know it's so windy now.
How do you think that nature writing can help engage with people who are currently disengaged? So there's an obvious market for nature writing. There's a look. Publishers are going for writers to play into an audience, but there's a vast swathe of people who don't engage with this. Is there a role for nature writing in helping to change that?
So I think to a certain extent, nature writing and storytelling, whether it's novels with nature themes, etc., are probably, and obviously not just books, it can be TV shows, it can be so many things. I think there has been a real disconnect, and people, especially in urban spaces, do not feel that nature is for them. Either they're made to feel unwelcome whenever they go to nature in places, or they can't afford access to it. And so very much, it touches on politics and economic and social policies that, there's only so much we can do with books. There are so many people who just cannot access nature.
Sure. I mean, I guess it feels like, to me, that's why it's so important to kind of have more books like this out there, just so you see your own experience reflected. So that's something for me, interested in kind of queer experiences. As I was kind of growing up, it felt like there was really this narrative that you kind of escaped to the city to go and find yourself, and that's where you found your people. And
like I'm really a countryside person and that didn't fit with me, but actually I don't feel like I've really seen an alternative picture, and I think it's by having those examples to look to that you see kind of what opportunities there might be for you.
Sarah, any more? I will, while you ponder, I'm going to make a comment. I'm going to be that person, and then I'll ask a question from online. When you're talking about green spaces and access to green spaces, and that you can't have those stories if people don't access them, and how you can support writers that are breaking into that scene, there is a book called Nature is a Human Right, which is a collection of essays which are about access to the green landscape. And Ellen's done a great job of looking for writers of colour in northern bits of the country where they're on council estates, but with access to maybe one forest, and then you discover something. And some people are writing in lyric about access to green spaces in New York, and it's a rap, and it's a completely different way of experiencing the land. And so in terms of supporting writers, one of the ways that we found is read anthologies where people are dipping their toe, find the writers, follow the writers, and then that will help them have the platform to then go to a publisher and say, actually, people want more from me. Okay, now the person online. You touched on, it's Sarah, you touched on climate change. What responsibility do nature writers publishers have to planet and culture with regard to travel and opening up untouched places?
Do you want to go?
I feel like I've already said no once. Yes, I do.
It's really hard. I do think, we talked about this earlier. There is a tradition of books in nature and in travel writing where it's sending someone from here all over the world to make the book as big and interesting. I think that expectation needs to change, and I think we need to be okay with that. And I think we should be more okay with bringing voices from abroad here, and I don't just mean American, I mean in translation. We need to do more of that instead of sending people there, I think, for so many reasons. And I think this is not quite the place for it, but travel writing, I think there's a big debate, and I think it's, every point of view I feel is very valid in terms of what the future of nature writing and what that's supposed to look. So I think most books that are being published in terms of nature writing will mention the climate crisis. I think there's no, so they all bring awareness of the crisis. Most books published are done so on specific paper that is either recycled or sourced ethically. There are things that happened, but that are already in place. But obviously, as any industry, thinking about the sort of carbon footprint, in terms of events, this is why having, live streaming is so important for events, both in terms of accessibility and also, people, not everyone traveling to events. I think it's a huge topic, and I think every little bit that people can do, from authors, publishers, agents, right, everyone really, festivals and bookshops is really important.
And I'll just add as well, I remember during COVID there was an event I was listening to or watching, and there were certainly one travel writer, might have been two, and of course they couldn't go anywhere. They were researching the next book and they couldn't go anywhere, and that was really odd to them, and they were just kind of talking about how they need to just change the way they look at things. And I think hopefully that this has changed, the way people think about things and write. I mean, we might go back to that, I'm not sure, but that's such an interesting thing, travel writing as a whole genre. It's so nice to be transported to somewhere, but do we really need to be, when you say, I've gone on the other side of the world where no one can go, just so you can read about it, it's like,
Yeah, so I think I don't have an answer to this, but I suppose what's going through my head at the moment is that I can see if you're writing specifically about climate change, that if you are engaging people who otherwise wouldn't have been interested in these topics as a result of traveling somewhere and being able to say, this is what deforestation looks like and I've seen it, or whatever, then maybe there's some sort of argument for making that trip because it kind of has an overall greater good. But it still makes me almost a bit uneasy. It feels like when you have politicians kind of jetting in for COP26 or whatever, and you think, well, I don't know, something about it doesn't sit right and I don't quite know why, which doesn't really answer the question, but those are the things that are going through my head anyway.
Very difficult.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
One more question. No, I'm going to give it back to you, and then you can do.
I've just got one more question, really. I think, I know from experience, writing about nature, but also writing non-fiction nature, you really have to put everything into it. You have to put your heart and soul into it. And I suppose, coming to you, Caro, is that what makes a book work, a nature writing book work?
So I guess when you say that, it also, you don't need to disclose every aspect of your identity and feelings. I think there's this idea that it's especially an expectation that comes with women writers that, the men can write the serious nature writing and the women have to talk about feelings. And you don't have to do that. You don't have to disclose your trauma to be able to publish a book successfully in nature writing. But at the same time, your genuine connection with nature in whatever shape that it takes is probably what will successfully come across to readers and agents and publishers. And so I think the meaningful connection with nature, and I guess that goes deep into how you feel about it, but not necessarily about your personal life.
Now, that's good advice from an agent, I'd say. That's really good advice. Are you still looking for publishers, writers out of interest?
Yeah.
Always, right. Just so everyone knows. And what about you? Do you feel a little bit like you are putting your heart and soul into it? Because, sorry to interrupt you, your book, I've only read the first chapter, haven't I? But it was really beautiful, really beautifully done. And it really showed an account of anxiety, which I've never read before, a really true account of it. So I think really well done for doing that, because it can't be easy, really.
So I mean, that's definitely been my experience. It's been quite challenging to write, to be honest, I guess partly because it does involve kind of putting myself back into a space that was quite painful and having to sit with that while I write about it. And also just because I found that I have to be really well emotionally resourced in every other area of my life. Otherwise, I just can't do it. So, the well has to be full, because otherwise it's just like drawing on empty. But I do think probably there are as many different ways to write as there are writers. So that's been how it is for me. But I guess you could find another writer where they don't have to go through this kind of emotional trauma of writing to get it out. I don't know.
I think
how has your process been?
I think when I'm in it, you don't realise you're doing it, but then afterwards, when you finish a chapter or something like that, you really finish a chapter. You're like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? And I didn't even really go into that much, I think I'm a little bit more like, this is about my family and this is about history and things like that. So I don't go into it too personally, but it still takes so much out of you. So, I really put my hand up to people that, really show their heart on the page, because it does. That's what makes it really interesting to read, and that's what gives the connection to the reader as well. So I'm sure you will do so well. You'll get the publisher that you need or want in a couple of weeks, I'm sure, and we can all read the book next year. Actually, will it be next year? No, it'll be year after. This is how long these things take. So 2 years probably. Yeah, 2 years. Caro knows. And my book will hopefully be out next year. Yeah, because mine was on submission.
I'll pre-order it.
Yeah, thank you. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really lovely. Caro Clarke from the Portobello Literary Agency and Rhiannon Bull. You can check out your website. Can we say that?
Yeah, I suppose. Could probably update that.
because you do copywriting and beautiful illustration as well. So, but your book should be out next year. 2 years. Oh goodness. Thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, have a look at all the books in the back there that Maria's got, and all the books we've talked about will either be there or in the bookshop. And if they're not, then I'm sure Mary can order them for you. Have a lovely day, everyone.